What really happened to the people who led Japan during World War II? When Japan surrendered in 1945, the war ended. But for its top leaders, a new fight was just beginning. These were the men behind invasions, war crimes, and the suffering of millions. The world wanted answers and justice. Some were arrested, some were put on trial, a few were executed, but not all of them paid the price. Others walked free. Some were even protected. And one, the most powerful man in Japan, kept his throne. This is the shocking story of what happened after the war ended. A story of trials, secrets, and how some of Japan's leaders escaped justice forever. Before and during World War II, Japan was ruled by a powerful group of military and political leaders. At the top was Emperor Hirohito, seen by many as a living god. Below him were men like Prime Minister Hideki Tojo and top generals who led Japan's army across Asia. They were responsible for major decisions, invading China, bombing Pearl Harbor, and ordering attacks that led to the deaths of millions. These leaders believed in building a strong empire, no matter the cost. Japanese soldiers committed brutal war crimes, from massacres in Nanjing to deadly human experiments. These crimes shocked the world. But after Japan's defeat, a big question remained. Who should be punished? Should everyone in power be held responsible, or just a few? That question would shape what happened next, and lead to one of the biggest war crime trials in history. In August 1945, after 2 atomic bombs and a long, brutal war, Japan surrendered to the Allies. The country was in ruins. Millions were dead or injured. Cities were flattened. People were starving. Soon after, American forces arrived. General Douglas MacArthur took control of the occupation. His job? To rebuild Japan and make sure it would never start another war. But before that could happen, the world wanted justice. MacArthur and the Allies began arresting top Japanese leaders. Prime Minister Tojo tried to kill himself when soldiers came for him, but he survived. Others were taken quietly, accused of planning and carrying out terrible crimes during the war. But not everyone was arrested. The biggest surprise: Emperor Hirohito stayed on the throne. Even though many believed he had helped lead the country into war, MacArthur decided to protect him. The goal was to keep peace and avoid rebellion. Some say it worked. Others say it let the most powerful man in Japan escape punishment. Either way, a new chapter had begun, one that would be written in courtrooms. In 1946, the Allies set up a major war crimes court in Tokyo. It was called the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, but most people just call it the Tokyo Trials. 25 top Japanese leaders were put on trial. They were charged with crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, for things like starting wars, killing civilians, and mistreating prisoners. The most famous name was Hideki Tojo, the former prime minister and military leader. He took responsibility for many of Japan's actions during the war. Alongside him were generals, diplomats, and ministers, men who had helped run the empire. The trials were long and detailed. They lasted over 2 years. Witnesses gave painful stories about torture, death marches, and mass killings. Documents showed how leaders had planned attacks and ignored international rules. Some of the accused said they were just following orders. Others denied knowing about the worst crimes, but the evidence was strong. In the end, the court found most of them guilty. For many around the world, the Tokyo trials were a sign that justice was possible, even after something as terrible as World War II. But not everyone agreed. Some critics said the trials were unfair or too focused on Japan while ignoring crimes by other countries. Still, the verdicts stood. And soon, punishments would be handed out. After the Tokyo trials, the judges announced their sentences. Out of the 25 men on trial, 7 were sentenced to death by hanging. These included Hideki Tojo and other top military leaders. They were executed in December 1948 at Sugamo Prison in Tokyo. Others received life in prison. A few were given shorter sentences. Some were even found not guilty and released. Tojo accepted his death calmly. Before he was hanged, he said he was proud to have fought for his country. But many victims and their families saw his execution as a small step toward justice. What shocked many people was who wasn't punished. Emperor Hirohito was never even put on trial. The US and other allies believed that keeping him on the throne would help keep Japan stable during the rebuilding years. So, while others were executed, Hirohito remained Japan's emperor until his death in 1989. This decision was, and still is, one of the most controversial parts of the post-war period. Some felt betrayed. Others believed it was necessary to move forward. Meanwhile, the men who were punished faded into history. Their stories were left out of textbooks, and their names became known only to historians and war survivors. But not all Japanese leaders faced the same ending. Some escaped prison altogether, and others would be released much sooner than expected. One of the biggest mysteries after World War II was why Emperor Hirohito was never punished. As Japan's emperor, Hirohito had been a powerful figure. He gave speeches, signed war declarations, and was treated almost like a god. Many believed he played a major role in Japan's military actions, or at least knew about them. But when the war ended, the US made a big decision. Hirohito would not be put on trial. Instead, they said he had no real control over the government and military. General MacArthur thought that if Hirohito was removed, Japan might fall into chaos or rebellion. So, the emperor stayed on the throne as a symbol of peace and rebuilding. In public, Hirohito said he was sorry for the war. He gave up his claim to being divine and became more of a traditional king than a godlike ruler. But he never fully explained his role in the war, and many people never got closure. To this day, Hirohito's legacy is debated. Was he a powerless figurehead? Or was he a quiet leader who escaped justice? No matter what the truth is, his survival helped shape the Japan we know today, and left deep scars for those who suffered. While the world focused on big names like Tojo and Hirohito, many other Japanese leaders and war criminals quietly faded into the background, or walked free much sooner than expected. Hundreds of lower-ranking officers and officials were tried in smaller courts across Asia. Some were found guilty of terrible crimes, including torture, forced labor, and executions of prisoners. Many were sentenced to long prison terms. Some were even executed. But things started to change in the 1950s. As the Cold War heated up, the US saw Japan as a possible ally against communism. Slowly, many convicted war criminals were released early, some after serving just a few years. Even people involved in medical experiments or prisoner abuse were let go. A few even returned to politics or business. By the late 1950s, Japan's focus had shifted from its dark past to rebuilding its economy, and the stories of these men were quietly forgotten. For victims and their families, it felt like justice had been rushed or reversed. While some criminals were punished, others lived normal lives again, with little mention of what they had done during the war. Today, Japan is seen as a peaceful and successful country, but the memory of World War II and what its leaders did still causes deep debate. Some Japanese textbooks barely mention the war crimes or downplay the role of Japan's leaders. At the same time, certain shrines still honor some of the men who were executed as war criminals, which has led to anger from countries like China and South Korea. Survivors and historians continue to push for more honesty about what happened. They want people to remember the victims and understand how those in power avoided full responsibility. The question of guilt remains complicated. Some leaders were punished, others weren't. Some were protected for political reasons, and some simply disappeared from the spotlight. Even now, many in Japan still struggle with how to talk about that dark chapter. Some feel shame, others feel it's time to move on. But one thing is clear: what happened after the war still affects how Japan is seen and how it sees itself to this day. Why should we still care about what happened to Japan's leaders after World War II? Because it shows how justice works and sometimes how it fails. Some people were punished, others walked free, and the most powerful man in the country kept his crown. This story reminds us that history isn't always fair. Political decisions, power struggles, and fear can all shape what justice looks like. It also shows how long the effects of war last. Even decades later, people are still arguing over what should have happened and who should have paid the price. Learning these stories helps us understand how power can be abused and why we must keep asking hard questions even when the war is over. The war ended, but the story didn't. Some of Japan's leaders faced the consequences, others didn't. And one man, the Emperor, kept his place, untouched. It's a powerful reminder. When the dust settles, justice isn't always equal. So what do you think? Should more leaders have been held responsible? Was protecting the Emperor the right choice, or a mistake? Let us know in the comments. And if stories like this interest you, the hidden truths, the forgotten trials, the faces behind history's most painful moments, then hit subscribe. We've got more to uncover.